Good morning. My name is Pam Dietz, and I am the Sunday school teacher today for First United Methodist Church on this December 6th. I'd like to welcome you to our church. This online video will be available on Wednesday on our church's Facebook page or our YouTube channel. So I want to first start by saying there is no formal Sunday school lesson for today. So any problems, mistakes, or other errors are totally mine because I made this all up. It is Advent season. This is the second Sunday in Advent, and something I discovered several years ago when I first started seriously studying the Bible for myself was that every word is important. Every word of the Bible is important. It has meaning. We may not always understand it. We may attribute a different meaning to it than what God intended, but it's all of great value to us. So one of the things I hated worst about reading was the genealogical lines, and the Old Testament is full of them, and it gets very boring. And it's interesting that the New Testament, which is the story of Jesus Christ, our salvation, begins with a genealogy. So at that point I decided it must have value. And I did a little bit of research. I'm not a scholar. This is just what I've discovered by reading the Bible, looking at the Bible. So Matthew 1 tells the story, the genealogy is the legal one, the royal line of the Messiah. 2 Samuel 7:14 has a requirement that the coming Messiah must be a descendant of David. And Matthew was written to the Hebrew people, the Jews, so it took a Jewish slant to try to convince the Jewish people of these things. So it makes sense that it's showing the royal line because of that requirement. The genealogy also shows up in Luke, and Luke is the biological line. Luke is the line of Joseph, who was supposedly the father of Jesus. And that's, I think, how it was phrased. Luke chapter 3, verse 23 says, "Now Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. He was the son, so it was thought, of Joseph." So Luke gives the biological line of Joseph, while Matthew gives the line of Mary, because they know that Mary was his mother, obviously. What's interesting about Luke, the genealogy, which is a little different, but still I like it, picking up in verse 36, Luke 3, verse 36, the son of Canaan, and remember this is giving the genealogy, the son of Canaan, the son of Arphaxad, the son of Shem, I know who Shem is, the son of Noah, he built the ark, the son of Lamech, the son of Methuselah, who was the longest living person that we know, the son of Enoch, who never died because he walked with God and then he was no more, the son of Jared, the son of Mahalalel, the son of Kenan, the son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. So that's Luke's genealogy. Matthew begins with, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So it goes back to Abraham. What I'd like to do is very briefly, give you what I know about each of these individuals. And it may not be a lot of information, but I find it interesting, and I want to put a thought in your minds for you to keep in the front of your mind while you're listening, why this genealogy may be important. And I'm sure there's various reasons. Jesus Christ was Son of God and Son of Man. He was the only perfect human being to ever live. He was perfectly without sin. He was made to be our perfect sacrifice once and for all, finished and done, and then we can accept that sacrifice and go to heaven. So keep that in your mind as I'm going through this. So this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. So let me start with Abraham. Abraham's story begins in Genesis 11. His wife was Sarah. Abraham made a covenant with the Lord to go where the Lord told him. In this process, he almost lost his wife twice through his disobedience. He saved his nephew Lot in a great battle. He was a great warrior. He was blessed by Melchizedek, which is the first priest of God that we know of, priest of Midian. He was declared righteous by faith. He shows up in Hebrews as the example of faith. He fathered Ishmael by Hagar, the Egyptian slave of Sarah. This was Abraham's firstborn son, but was not the child of the promise. He then fathered Isaac by Sarah, who was the child of the promise. And they were both at an advanced age. It was impossible for them to conceive, and yet they did. He was told to then sacrifice this child of the promise, but at the last minute, God saved the day by sending another sacrifice. Abraham was declared a friend of God, and he was known and held up now as an example for his faith and his righteousness. So moving on to Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Isaac's story is in Genesis 17. He was the promised child of the covenant to Abraham and Sarah. And something interesting about the life of Isaac is he stayed within the boundaries of the promised land. And I don't know why. I haven't found that out yet. But this is one of the things I'm looking for an answer to. Rather than go to find a wife, he sent his servant to find a wife from his mother's relatives. And Rebekah became his wife and the mother of twins Esau and Jacob. Isaac was tricked into blessing Jacob. Jacob was the father of Judah. Jacob's story is in Genesis 25. He was the second son. He bought Esau's birthright. He paid for his birthright. He tricked Isaac into blessing him. And at the end, he fled to Haran, where he had a vision at Bethel along the way. He worked for Laban in order to marry Rachel. He himself was tricked into marrying the older sister Leah before he could also marry Rachel. He had 12 sons, 1 daughter, and 4 wives. 2 of the wives were servants of Leah and Rachel. And on his way back home to the promised land, he wrestled with God and had his name changed to Israel. So he is the father of Israel. And the Israelites come from that name. So Jacob's 4th son, the son of Leah and Jacob, was named Judah. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, and his story picks up in Genesis 29. Now, of all the sons, Joseph was the favorite. Joseph was the second youngest and was the favorite son because he was the son of beloved Rachel. And the brothers were jealous of Joseph, and you can read Joseph's story for yourself. But they conspired to put Joseph in a well and then to kill him. But when the time came to kill him, Judah protested. So he stood up. He didn't actually stop the plan, but at least he did stand up against it. And his name became used for the southern kingdom when they split later. So Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Tamar was the mother of Perez and Zerah, but Tamar wasn't married to Judah. She was married to Judah's son. Her story is in Genesis 38, and she is the first woman named in the genealogy of Jesus. And in the time where men were everything and women were considered property, this is valuable. There's a reason. Judah gave his son Er in marriage to Tamar, and when Er died, he gave his second son Onan to her to father children for her for his firstborn son. And this is according to the Hebrew law of the time. Well, Onan died. These two were evil, and God didn't think they deserved to live, so they died. Rather than giving his third child, who was too young to marry at the time, Judah told Tamar, go back to your father and stay with him. And then when my third son is old enough, I will send for you. Well, he didn't. And she found out, and she was upset. And under her rights, women had very few rights. Remember this. And this was one that she did have, was the right to bear children by the next brother. She went to find Judah. And as it happened, she sat at the side of the road. She was dressed as a temple prostitute. He assumed that's who she was. He went in, had relations with her, and then she became pregnant. And when she was supposed to be stoned for her sin, she revealed who the father of her child was, and so her life was spared. She ended up having twins. So Perez was the son of Judah and Tamar. Genesis 38. The twin brother Zerah was actually considered the firstborn because he stuck his aunt out of the birth canal. The midwife tied a red thread around it, but he pulled his hand back, and Perez came out. Perez is in the line of Jesus. The father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon. And these, I couldn't find anything about these people. Nahshon was the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz. Oh, no, there's a name I know. Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. There's another name I know. So Rahab is the second woman mentioned in this genealogical line. Rahab was a prostitute for real. When Joshua and the Israelites stood on the border of Canaan preparing to enter, he sent some spies to see what was going on and who the enemies were and where they were to best go in. And the spies were hunted, and Rahab hid them and saved them. And because she believed, she saved her family. So that's Rahab. Rahab is Boaz's mother. Boaz is the one who married Ruth. So maybe he married a Gentile woman because he had a prostitute mother and he was a little more open-minded and less inclined to be very narrow and judgmental. And if you will remember the story of Ruth, which is in the book of Ruth, she was a Gentile woman married to a Hebrew man who died and chose to follow her mother-in-law back to the promised land. And we know her for her loyalty. And so along the way, she worked in the fields of Boaz to gather the grain because they had no money. And they had, the nearest male relative would not help them. So Boaz was a distant relative. So she worked in his field and came to his attention. And as it happens when God is in charge and we let him do what he needs to do, she came to marry Boaz. And they had Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and we know Jesse was the father of David, King David. David's story begins in Ruth chapter 4, continues in 1 Chronicles, 1 and 2 Samuel. He was the youngest son of Jesse, a sheep herder, a musician, a psalmist. He was anointed by Samuel to be king while King Saul was still alive. He was the one chosen by God because Saul was kind of taking a wrong path. David killed Goliath. We know that story. He was a great warrior king. David was far from perfect. He saw a woman bathing on a roof one day and had her husband sent to the front to fight and be killed, and he slept with her. And in spite of his sins, David was a mighty man of God. His second son was Solomon, son of Solomon of David and Bathsheba. And this is the third woman named in the line of Jesus, was Uriah's wife, and her name is Bathsheba. Solomon's story is in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles. He was the second son of David and Bathsheba. He was appointed king by David. When the time came in the temple and God said, I will give you whatever you wish, he didn't ask for fame and riches. He asked for wisdom. And that's what he is known for. But he became rich and powerful anyway. He married too many wives. He had 700. He had 300 concubines, and his heart was led astray by them. So he didn't follow God as completely as his father David did. But he is still known for his wisdom and for building the temple. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. His story is in 1 Kings 11, 1 Chronicles 3, and it's at this time when Solomon died that the kingdom was split into two, the north and the south. The southern kingdom is the one that the line comes through. Rehoboam was the father of Abijah. Abijah's story is in 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles, and he attempted to reunite the kingdom, but he failed. He was the father of Asa, Asa the father of Jehoshaphat. And this always cracks me up because when I was growing up, we watched Bugs Bunny cartoons, and it was Jumpin' Jehoshaphat was the exclamation that Bugs Bunny would say. Jehoshaphat's story is in 2 Chronicles 18. He was the king of the southern kingdom and a follower of God like his father Asa. Ahab at this time was the king of the northern kingdom, and he was evil. Jehoshaphat was the father of Jehoram. Jehoram's story is in 2 Chronicles, and he was pretty bad. He killed his brothers. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. And I just want to read this brief passage from 2 Chronicles 21, verse 18. After all this, the Lord afflicted Jehoram with an incurable disease of the bowels. In the course of time, at the end of the 2nd year, his bowels came out because of the disease, and he died in great pain. His people made no funeral fire in his honor, as they had done for his predecessors. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He passed away to no one's regret and was buried in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. How sad that he passed away to no one's regret. Jehoram was the father of Uzziah, whose story is in 2 Chronicles 26. He was 16 when he became king, and he did what was right in the Lord's eyes until he became powerful. Then he entered into the temple, and he burned incense that only the consecrated priests were allowed to burn. When that happened, he broke out in leprosy, and then he was exiled. Uzziah was the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz. Ahaz did evil in the sight of the Lord, and his story is in 2 Chronicles 28. He burned his children as sacrifices. He burned his children as sacrifices. Obviously, one of them survived. Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah, his story is in 2 Chronicles 29. He purified the temple and did what was right in the Lord's eyes, and they found the scroll saying what all the rules and regulations were supposed to be, and his heart was so stricken that they had fallen so far from what God's plan was, God's desire, that he called the congregation, everybody to come together. In 2 Chronicles 30, verse 26, there was great joy in Jerusalem, for since the days of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem. That's a long time. There had been nothing like this since the days of David and Solomon. The priests and the Levites stood to bless the people, and God heard them. God heard their prayer. Their prayer reached heaven, his holy dwelling place. Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh, when he became king, did evil in the sight of God until he was captured. 2 Chronicles 33 tells that story. The Lord spoke to Manasseh, but they paid no attention. So the Lord brought against them the army of Assyria, who took Manasseh prisoner, put a hook in his nose, bound him, and took him to Babylon. Now finally, in his distress, he sought the favor of God, and he humbled himself greatly, and he prayed. And God was so moved by his prayers that he listened, and he brought him back to Jerusalem. And then Manasseh knew that the Lord is God. So even if you're bad, there's still hope. Manasseh, the father of Amon. Now Amon was evil. He was the father of Josiah. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Josiah, the father of Jeconiah and his brothers, and this is the time of exile to Babylon. At this point, it gets a little hazy for me. After the exile, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and I know I'm mutilating these names, but bear with me. He was the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was not the king of Israel, but he was a very important man. He was a leader. And Ezra 4 tells the story of how he helped to rebuild the temple, which had been ruined under King Cyrus of Persia. And this was an act of God to move the Persian kings to allow them to rebuild the temple. So then it goes on listing multiple names until it comes to Mathan, the father of Jacob, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who was called the Messiah. So this is the end of that first chapter of genealogy in Matthew. And my point is this, my takeaway is this: not one of these people was perfect. Maybe the closest one was David, Abraham, but they still sinned. Their faith still failed. Their actions we're still self-centered and selfish. Not one of us is perfect, and this line contains many imperfect people. It contains a couple prostitutes. Some people were trying to follow God, and they still sinned. So this imperfect, sinful line of man produced the perfect Son of God. And if you remember the first 5 books throughout the Old Testament, there's a lot of rules that have to be followed. There's a lot of regulations. There's a lot of prophecies that have to be fulfilled for the Messiah. And Jesus, the Son of Mary, was the one who fulfilled all those rules, all those regulations, and all those prophecies to be our Messiah, so that he could be the one perfect sacrifice once and for all, so that we can be in relationship with God. We don't have to jump through a lot of hoops. We don't have to follow so many rules we cannot remember them. All we have to do is come before God with an open heart and ask him to take us to be his, and he will. So that's my takeaway from these genealogies, at least the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And I thank you, and that's the end of the lesson for today.